Basically, by the end, this book feels like a bit of a con. A couple of weeks ago, I set out to do The Artist's Way, a book that outlines a 12-week course in 12 days. Yes, I am temporarily unemployed, why'd you ask? My aim was to get a feel for the course, see if it was something I wanted to do properly for the full 3 months, and to get rid of the Artist's Way cloud hanging over me. So many people, both in real life and online, kept recommending this book to me, but I just could not get into it no matter how many times I tried. So I thought I'd speedrun it and see what all the fuss is about. And I made daily videos recording this, so you can check those out. I gave it a couple of weeks to stew. I said I would do a review straight away, but actually I waited. And right at the start, I think my view is that this book should be used with caution. It won't work for everybody. It could be harmful to some people. I definitely don't think it should be recommended as a blanket recommendation to any aspiring creative, no matter what the reason they find themselves to be stuck. I think your individual circumstances will really affect the effectiveness of the book. And I thought, while I review it, I'll rip up some of my morning pages and recycle them into new paper. And I'll rip some out and then start talking because I tested the sound and they're really loud. I think at best, this book is sort of useless. Now, let me explain. I know a lot of people have had life-changing insights from following the course. And if you watch my daily series, I did too. I had some good insights. But I think that had a lot more to do with where I was in my life and with the amount of time I was dedicating to simply journaling and thinking about my creativity than the book itself. The basic tools of the book are morning pages, 3 sides of A4 written freehand every morning first thing, and the artist's date. I will talk more in depth about morning pages later on, but I would say that those 2 things really are the only takeaway from the book that I would share with people. If journaling freehand for 3 pages every morning brings clarity into your life, then do it. It can work, works for me, it can work. But these are not just the basic tools of the course. They are actually the only tools of the course. Each chapter gives you so many prompts to write stuff out and dig stuff out, and virtually no tools to ever take any action. If you like making lists, you may love doing this course because that's the book's favorite task or prompt or exercise. It's to write lists out. Lists of your wishes, lists of your fears, of your dreams, your goals, lists and lists and lists. And I love a list. But the reason why I love them is because they give me a full sense of having achieved something. You can feel very energized after writing out a good list if you're that kind of person. But you haven't really done anything. All you've done is you wrote a list. That's what you've done. And the book rarely gives you any tools to actually do anything about the lists. I mean, the book is explicitly aimed at recovering the inner creative for people that the author calls blocked creatives. So if we're blocked, presumably we have some resistance to taking action. So the complete focus on thinking and perhaps overthinking sometimes and generating ideas and a complete disregard for action feels counterintuitive in a book aimed at these kinds of people. I think if I will continue to get something out of the journal I did for the book, it's because of the headspace that I found myself in and the actions that I took after finishing the book. You may say, yes, but you got the idea for your project from the book, from doing the book. But actually, I think those things would have just stayed ideas if it were just for the book. I think there were other things in my life that encouraged me to take action, such as, for example, making daily videos for YouTube and just generally where I am in my life. I think in the past, I know in the past when I've attempted The Artist's Way, I still generated a lot of ideas, but then I didn't act on them. And I'm not the only one to think this. I found a master's project from a student at the University of Massachusetts who actually found the book helpful but concluded that Cameron's method opened my creative doors, but I could not walk through them. I felt like there was something missing in my method of creative inquiry. The morning pages and artist dates were not enough to specifically define my creative path. I needed direction that would help me in more specific ways. I will link this in the description, but this is someone who found the book helpful. And it's a good encapsulation. The book can make you feel lit up, but ultimately it's like listening to an inspirational talk and not making any notes. You feel energized for a few minutes or hours, and then you just go back to your usual life. I'm not saying that people who claim that their life was changed by the book are lying. Obviously, not at all. Like, I believe them. I think this book, with the right person, at the right time in their life, can have a positive impact. But I think the impact is due to the space where the reader or the course taker finds themselves when reading a book, rather than anything within the book itself. Now, what you're supposed to do with this is that you soak them in water and then blend them up after a few hours of soaking. And I have a lot to say, but I didn't want to keep you here for hours. And also, blending is very loud and not really camera friendly. So yes, I have some I prepared earlier, like a kid's show. Another issue I had with the book is its theology. Now, I'll be upfront, I'm not a theologian, and I am myself an atheist, but that's not what this is about. That's not where my criticisms come from. I went into the course knowing from the introduction that this was a spiritual book. I was on board with that. I was prepared to be along for the ride. However, the way this book presents itself at the start is misleading. Julia Cameron states at the start that you do not have to have spiritual beliefs. You can be an atheist or an agnostic and still get the benefits of this book. And in the first few chapters, Cameron makes a point of giving an alternative whenever God or a similar supernatural entity is referenced, for those who don't want to use the word God. I personally found that quite jarring. I felt like it took me out of the flow of the book. I was on board for a book written by someone with some unspecified spiritual beliefs. I'm fine with that. I have no issue reading stuff written by people with all faiths and adapting it to my own worldview. No problem. So Cameron's attempts at appealing to everyone were just a bit odd, and I kind of felt like it didn't really work, and I just wish she just said God when she meant God. Because sometimes she says to substitute good orderly direction instead of God. I mean, what does that even mean, good orderly direction? And if you try to substitute it in some of the basic principles at the start of the book, you get nonsensical sentences such as, creativity is good orderly direction's gift to us. Using our creativity is our gift back to good orderly direction. That doesn't make sense, right? That should be God. This is more of an annoyance than anything substantial, but by chapter 3, I started noticing more theologically concerning things. For example, page 63. If there is no God, or if that God is disinterested, we can easily resign ourselves to apathy. What's the use? Why try changing anything? That's kind of like a fundamental misunderstanding of how a person who doesn't believe in a God who is personally invested in our lives perceives the world. We can be motivated to change stuff without there being a supernatural entity. If anything, you could use the same exact argument to say, oh, religious people may as well give in to apathy because God is in charge and nothing we do matters. And I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just pointing out how illogical the statement is and how Cameron seems to not understand how a person who doesn't believe in God thinks. And in the same chapter, Cameron redefines the phrase, God helps those who help themselves, to mean not that God favors those who do stuff on their own, but to mean people who help themselves, like help yourself from a buffet. If you take, God will give you more. And that's where things start taking a very strange turn in the theology of the artist's way. Quick aside, as I said, I'm not a theologian, but I found a master's thesis in theology comparing Ignatian spirituality and the artist's way, but it's in Norwegian. Sounds very interesting, but it's in Norwegian. So if you read Norwegian, I'll put a link below. With my layperson's analysis, basically the book starts to cultivate the idea of this personal God A God that somehow allows disease and poverty and starvation and war and inequality, but is individually and personally invested in helping me, an aspiring actor, get more auditions. It's actually not a problem, of course, if this book is just not for me. It's just aimed at a different kind of person. That's great. But the book itself claims that you do not need to be religious to embark on the course at the start. And then we get to chapter 5, and then we read. The shift to spiritual dependency is a gradual one. We have been making the shift slowly but surely. It's almost as if Cameron thinks that by this point in the book, we've come around to her view of things, and she's converting us. And then it gets frankly bizarre in chapter 6, where there is this kind of weird worship of money and wealth and capitalism with a quote, "Money is God in action," basically implying that people who don't have enough tell themselves it's not their fault, but actually God would like us all to be wealthy. It's us who turn down his gifts of actual human cash. I think, it's clear why this view of God can be quite problematic, shifting the blame from systems to the individual. The reason why you don't have money is because you don't help yourself, not because of, the capitalist system or oppression or conflict or illness. No. It's your personal fault. Again, I have no issue with people having their own spiritual beliefs. I can even see how Cameron's belief in a personal, supportive God may help her and others to feel a sense of meaning in their life. That's all great. This is not where I take issue. It's the way in which these spiritual ideas are twisted in a way that can be quite hurtful, I think. And the fact that the book doesn't disclose its theological stance at the start. Until a few chapters in, it keeps claiming that you do not need to have a spiritual belief to follow the book. And then it lures you in, and then actually you not only need spiritual beliefs, you need to subscribe to a very specific idiosyncratic view of God. So what I'm doing here, by the way, is I have a piece of cloth and a lid that I'm using as a guide, and I'm pressing my blended up paper pulp into shape. So I'll keep doing that, and I'll use this sponge to soak up some of the excess water and drain it into here over the next bit, just in case you're wondering what I'm doing. This is my final point. If you're looking at the time, yes, it's a long point. Okay. I think at worst, this book is irresponsible and can cause harm. I'm not saying it will in every circumstance. I'm not assigning any kind of pre-planned malice to the book. I don't think that's the aim, but it's hard to ignore. The book asks you to go to very dark places sometimes. Many of the exercises and tasks ask you to think about times where you experienced rejection, what Cameron calls artist injuries, times where you got close to your dream and then you took a U-turn, whether it was self-inflicted or not. Basically things that, depending on your life, could dig up quite painful memories and traumatic experiences. And the book itself acknowledges this as a desirable result. You want to be digging up trauma. But, and just as I'm not a theologian, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but in my opinion, and of others I've found, the book does not provide tools to deal with all the trauma that you've just unearthed. Kind of like with all the lists you make, you dig up all this stuff, and not only you don't get actionable steps, you don't get aftercare in this case. So you're just left to sit with feelings of abandonment and sadness and rejection and shame and guilt and whatever it is, and then good luck. Sometimes Cameron says, forgive yourself. Well, it's not that easy, is it? And I'm in a mentally stable state, and even I left some tasks feeling really down and spirally. The prompts are often so leading. They try to lead you to a specific, often negative conclusion. And sometimes this is just a bit comical. There is a prompt that says, as a kid, my mother taught me that daydreaming was blank. I remember she'd tell me to snap out of it by reminding me that blank. That's just so specific. But sometimes it made even me, a pretty non-susceptible person, question whether in fact I did have an issue that I don't have. The prompts are phrased in such a way that it becomes really easy to convince yourself that you have a problem with something, And then the prompts encourage you to reinforce that belief. For example, Cameron claims that everybody is blocked by what she calls the deadly: alcohol, drugs, sex, work, money, food, family and friends. And she urges you to write these down on little slips of paper and then draw them at random and then write down 5 ways in which they negatively affect you. She states, if the one you choose seems difficult or inapplicable to you, consider this resistance. And if you draw the same deadly repeatedly, that's significant, and it will lead through denial to clarity. Now, perhaps most people reading this will think, well, no, actually, some of these things don't apply to me, and they will just move on. But if you're someone who is more impressionable, or, you've just really bought into this book, which is kind of what the book asks you to do, you're doing the course properly, you may get to this point and start trying to tell yourself that you do have a problem with all of these things. It's kind of discouraging you from trusting your gut feeling and, telling you that something you think it's not an issue, it's actually resistance. You're kind of repressing the issue. She actually encourages you when approaching a new project to list out all your fears, your resistances, what you get from not pursuing the project. And then that's it. There isn't a follow-up on how to deal with these fears. No options to say, actually, I feel quite excited and happy about the project. No positives allowed. After forcing you to admit to fears that you may not even have had before. You can convince yourself of anything this way. Now, 1. Obviously, there are some positive prompts as well. Remembering people who supported you and stuff like that, yes. It's not just negative prompts. But the majority of them are negative, or they encourage you to externalize wishes and promises to yourself, but then it gives you no way to action them. So actually has the potential to turn into a negative. It tells you, for example, to make yourself 10 promises and then keep them. But since it gives you no tools to do that, actually you may make those promises, not keep them to yourself, and then that will become further evidence to convince yourself that you cannot trust yourself, that you are not capable. 2. Yes, sometimes a numbness towards something is resistance. Sometimes you think you don't have an issue with something, and you actually do have that. But I think if you're at that level of denial, that's something for maybe a trained professional to dig into, rather than a book by someone who, as far as I can tell from looking it up, has no training in therapy or psychology of any type. And finally, onto the morning pages. They are the only tool you have to deal with everything that comes up in this course. Actions to take, how to implement them, how to prioritize them, how to deal with all the negative stuff that's coming up, everything. You're supposed to ask yourself questions and answer them in the morning pages. Don't lift your pen from the paper, just write. I'm the first to admit, the morning pages are very useful to me. I am a journaling kind of person. Writing stuff out does help me to clear my mind. And I am shredding them right now because there are just so many of them. What am I going to do? I'm going to die and I'm going to leave a room filled with 3 pages every day for the rest of my life, hopefully, relatively long life. So I have looked through the pages and highlighted bits and transcribed insights and stuff, but then I'm shredding them. But I think the morning pages as the only tool is a very weak proposition. For some people, they just don't work. If you have a tendency to ruminate or spiral, if you're anxious, depressed, the morning pages can be a place to reinforce all the negativity rather than purging it. Because it's unguided journaling, by definition, 3 pages, no prompts, so you may be externalizing incredibly dark stuff, and depending on your state of mind, you then have 3 pages to reinforce all those negative thoughts, reiterate them, spiral, and start your day feeling depleted and down. There's a blog post by author Jennifer Tatro, where she describes her experience of the morning pages making her miserable and depressed and leaving her in tears most morning. And her continuing with it because she thought that's what they're supposed to do. That somehow bringing all this stuff out into the light was helpful to her creativity, until she realized that it was just ruining her mental health, and there were other practices, such as meditation and guided journaling in her case, that were much more helpful to her. And in that blog post, she also recounts this heartbreaking story of her mother doing morning pages for most of her life and then leaving them after her passing. And Jennifer and her brother not being able to resist having a peek and finding out that these pages were filled with pain and negativity, and just the thought of this woman spending decades of her life starting her days in such a dark place, thinking that that was helping her, is just so sad. So if morning pages don't work for you, you may just not stick with them, and then you won't get harmed by them, hopefully. But if you do so, if you stop doing them, then the book completely loses its value, because every insight I got from the book was due to my propensity for journaling. If journaling didn't work for me, then the book offers no alternative. Now, of course, a book cannot be all things for all people. Sure, I understand that a self-help book based on journaling is going to be aimed at people who like journaling. Fine. But there are different kinds of journaling. 3 pages every morning, whether you're a morning person or a night owl, will not work for a large proportion of people, even those who like journaling. And the morning pages are the only thing in this book that has any potential to help you sort out the incredible output you're going to be creating by doing the course, teasing out what's important, what's not, what you want to do about it, and so on. It can be a good thing that Cameron encourages you to be self-sufficient and ask yourself questions rather than rely on the book for guidance. That's good. That means that you learn to trust yourself and you'll be able to continue using the skill after you finish the book. But if you are the target audience for this book, a blocked creative, just being told to write with no guidance may not be enough, and it could be actually harmful. Which brings me to the end of the book. A most baffling ending to this book. I've seen some people online in forums asking, everyone's recommending The Artist's Way and I've just started it and I don't get it. Does it get better? And let me tell you, it does not get better. I would say it gets worse. Some of the later chapters are quite repetitive and sort of filler and disjointed. And some of it may be on purpose to reiterate an important point now that you're further into the course and better equipped, perhaps. But the penultimate chapter, I thought it was just random bits of writing that didn't fit anywhere else, and Cameron wanted the book to be 12 chapters, so in they went, chapter 11. Don't sell yourself out to Hollywood. Exercise is important. Like a chapter ago, we were still working on calling ourselves artists, and now we're worried about selling ourselves out to Hollywood. Sell out what? I'm a blocked artist. I'm not making anything. I don't have anything to sell out. Anyway, final chapter. The focus is strangely, bafflingly on inaction. It tells you not to take your ideas out before they're ready, not to share your creative ideas with people. There's little guidance on how you're supposed to know that an idea is not ready. You should just know. Who is a safe person to share creative ideas with? Who isn't? I don't know. You should just know. This chapter tells you that when you have an idea, a creative project, you should zip the lip, button up, keep a lid on it. Containment is the first rule of magic. Now, as a book aimed at unblocking blocked artists, to end on the note that you should not be sharing your work is so strange. It gives no forward momentum, no energy to take action. And the thing is, if you tell a block creative not to share something until it's ready, 9 times out of 10, they'll take that as permission never to share it, right? Because it'll never be 100% ready for outside feedback. You know, you have to put yourself out there even if there is a risk. And that's something that the book does say elsewhere. But then in this final chapter, it kind of tries to undo any active stuff that it created, any forward movement that it created in the rest of the book. I will read out loud the ending of the book. This is before the final tasks and the epilogue, but the ending of chapter 12. This is quoting a friend of Cameron's. They will try to get you. Don't forget that, warns Michelle. Set your goals and set your boundaries. I would add, set your sights and don't let the ogre that looms on the horizon deflect your flight. The final thought is they will try to get you. Don't forget that. It's so negative and so fear-mongering. Some people accuse this book of having culty vibes, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. But the ending does have very strange vibes. It's saying we get you, but no one else does. And the final task on the final page, pre-epilogue, is reread this book and share it with your friends. Now, I'm not claiming that Cameron is trying to make you dependent on the book. Actually, many of the things in the book are aimed at making you independent and trust yourself. But you get to the end of the book and it kind of feels like only the book and the people who read it are trustworthy, and you can recapture the feeling of excitement, of energy that you had throughout the book by redoing the book. Because this final chapter will have taken the wind out of your sails and you will want to feel proactive again. And so you'll go back maybe and try and make more lists to make yourself feel active. And I'm not saying it's calculated, but after telling you to be self-reliant, to then tell you to keep your ideas to yourself and read a book again feels very backwards. Basically, by the end, this book feels like a bit of a con. It claims to be helpful, but has very little guidance. It lures you in, saying it's suitable for secular people, but it relies very heavily on a very specific set of beliefs. And it promises to unblock you, but at best, it's up to you to do that. And at worst, it can make you actively worse mentally and creatively. If you still want to try it out, I'd recommend doing it either like I did it, speed running it, not taking it too seriously. And even if you do it in the right time frame, just do it for fun, in a light-hearted way. There's this article on The Cut by Megan O'Connell, who calls The Artist's Way a terrible book, but finds it helpful in a sort of embarrassing way. I think that's a good attitude to have. I think even though it's kind of boring, have a read or a scan of the book before you start. That won't necessarily give you a feel as to whether the book is helpful to you, because it's the exercises that do all the work. But at least you'll know what you're getting yourself into, what the tone of the book is. And give yourself permission to stop. If it's really not working for you, just it's fine. Just stop the book. And of course, talk to a safe person or a professional if the course is bringing up uncomfortable stuff for you that you feel unable to sort out by yourself. Thank you for watching. If somehow this wasn't enough for you, I've linked a playlist of all of my Artist Way videos below. I record myself every day. And that's all for today. I'll see you in a couple of days. Bye bye.